Comparisons are a useful and common way to organize information and make decisions. By opposing items or ideas against each other, writers can illuminate specific aspects of each item or idea, more so than if that item or idea were considered in isolation. To illustrate this point, think about how colors can change when they are placed next to each other. When you're buying paint, picking out a new piece of furniture, or choosing new towels, the color of these items can look very different in the store than when they are placed in your own home against the paint or furniture that you already own. A comparison can actually change how we see something. Comparisons can be more difficult when ideas and concepts, rather than concrete items, are involved. In these situations, developing an argument and organizing information become especially important.
Many of us have heard the saying that an apples to orange comparison won't work. This phrase is used to discount the validity of a comparison, according to Scott Baronato in Darwin magazine. The attempt to bring up an apples to oranges comparison is usually made by someone who doesn't want to make a comparison. It's a genius cop-out, continues Baronato. The phrase suggests that two items are so different that no comparison can be made. Is this really true? What if we were merely trying to compare types of fruit? Couldn't an apples to oranges comparison be made then? In fact, when we really consider it, there are probably many different ways that apples and oranges could be compared. Both have flowers, both have seeds, and both offer some nutrition. On the other hand, an apples to dogs comparison might be more difficult to carry out. What do these two things have in common? What might be concluded is that similarities are a necessary component of a comparison. Without similarities, there's nothing to compare. On the other hand, it might be pointless to compare two items that are nearly identical. Although something could be said about two coins made at the same mint on the same day, it could be difficult to develop a full argument. Let's return to our apples to oranges comparison. What is different about these two fruits? Their color, the climate needed to grow them, and the time of year in which they are harvested are all different. Combining a similarity such as nutritional value with a difference such as climate might make an interesting argument. Therefore, both similarities and differences are needed in order to create a useful comparison. Although both similarities and differences are needed in order to draw an interesting comparison, still more is needed in order to create an argument. In this discussion, argument does not mean a fight or disagreement. Instead, argument, in academic writing, means a specific stand or point of view. Most academic writing must do more than inform or explain. It must also present the writer's standpoint on an issue and answer a crucial but difficult question. So what? Many writers recognize that similarities and differences are both necessary for comparison. Therefore, they think that a good thesis statement will be a sentence that simply explains that similarities and differences exist. For example, a statement such as, "Apples and oranges have many similarities and differences," is a common first attempt at a comparison thesis. However, this statement is not an effective thesis statement. This statement is too broad. Many questions still remain. For example, what are those similarities? And what are those differences? An intermediate step would be to try to answer these questions. Observe the following statement. Apples and oranges are similar in that they are both fruit harvested from trees. However, they offer different nutrients. The problem here is that even though a similarity and a difference are shown, the statement still does not answer an important question. So what? Why would a reader need or want to know about this similarity and difference? What new information comes to light as a result of this comparison? A third revision might read, although both apples and oranges offer vitamin C, apples also provide fiber. Oranges have almost no fiber, but are a good source of B vitamins. Therefore, it's unnecessary to choose between apples and oranges. Both can be eaten as part of a healthy diet. Let's compare the first version of a thesis comparing apples and oranges to the third version. Both are about apples and oranges and both note similarities and differences. However, the third version is about only one topic. It is both longer and more specific. These characteristics often work together. More language is needed in order to narrow down the topic. In addition, the third version tries to answer the crucial question, so what? Organization is another important part of comparisons. Because comparisons normally present a lot of information, it's important to follow a pattern of organization as closely as possible to avoid confusing your reader and to make sure that the comparison is clear. There are two main organizational forms. Different sources call these patterns different names. However, the arrangements themselves are the same. Within this discussion, we'll name the two block and alternating patterns. Block patterns present everything about the first item under comparison and then everything about the second item. Note that in the outline, the three criteria are the same and they are presented in exactly the same order. Because the block pattern is asking the reader to remember a lot of information, it should follow the same order of information. The other possible choice is an alternating pattern of organization. In this format, the criteria themselves become the main topics, and the two items under discussion are compared within each criterion. Note that the order is the same within the three topics. Apples are discussed first, and then oranges. There are no specific rules about when to use these different patterns of organization. Generally speaking, if you are writing a shorter essay, the items that you are comparing are easily understandable to the reader. In this case, you might want to emphasize one item over another, so using a block pattern of organization might work best. For example, comparing two political candidates lends itself to the block pattern of organization. If you are writing a longer essay, the items that you are comparing are somewhat new to the reader. For this reason, you want to give the two items equal attention. In this case, the alternating pattern of organization might work best. For example, comparing two works of literature to illuminate a particular point lends itself to the alternating pattern of organization.
While you are in college, you are probably writing a comparison in response to an assignment. You may have been asked to compare possible causes of the American Civil War, or to compare two accounting methods. Perhaps you are working to compare two works of literature written by the same author. In these types of situations, you have been told to write a comparison. When you are not in school, however, you probably still use comparisons frequently. Comparisons are an excellent way to make informed decisions. You might compare two suppliers of a similar product. You might compare two types of cars you're thinking about buying. You may need to compare health insurance plans. In these and other situations, merely identifying the fact that similarities and differences exist would not give you enough information to make a good decision. Instead, you would need to identify specific criteria and to evaluate and make decisions based on that criteria. This is also what's necessary for a successful comparison essay.